Welcome to Sleepy Tales, where relaxing stories are told slowly and softly to help you gently fall asleep. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. For more peaceful tales, subscribe and hit the bell to stay updated. Now, get comfortable and drift off to tonight's bedtime story. In every kingdom, there comes a moment when pride speaks louder than truth, and people begin to agree with things they do not fully understand. The tale of the emperor and his famous outfit is one of those moments, a soft reminder that honesty can sometimes be found in the smallest voice. This retelling follows the emperor's rising excitement over a mysterious new cloth, the kingdom's eager anticipation, and the gentle lesson that grows from one simple truth. There was once a kingdom known for its calm days, soft breezes, and the gentle way life seemed to settle into every corner. The people worked, rested, and lived in a steady rhythm that made the kingdom feel safe and warm, as though time itself moved at a peaceful stroll. At the heart of this kingdom stood a grand palace, bright with sunlight in the mornings and glowing softly in the evenings. And within that palace lived the emperor, a ruler admired by his people not for his power, but for the quiet pride he took in the beauty of things. The emperor was a man who loved lovely objects. He admired paintings, sculptures, shimmering decorations, and anything crafted with skill and care. But above all, he loved clothing. Fine clothing, careful clothing, clothing stitched with patterns that seemed to dance when he walked. To him, clothes were more than fabric. They were treasures, tiny worlds of color and shape. Every morning, the emperor looked forward to choosing what he would wear, as though opening the day like a storybook filled with possibility. Those around him knew this about him. They carried soft fabrics across long tables, dusted shelves where folded garments rested like sleeping swans, and kept rooms filled with wardrobe chests, polished and ready. The palace tailors were some of the busiest workers in the building, not because the emperor demanded new outfits constantly, but because he cherished variety. He liked the feeling of discovering something fresh, something he had not yet worn, something that showed the artistry of his kingdom. The emperor's fondness for clothing was harmless. It caused no trouble, no worry, and no burden for his people. The kingdom was stable, and there was no great conflict to pull his attention away. His officials managed daily matters well, and the citizens were content. Sometimes, when tasks were slow and days were bright, people would even smile about their ruler's hobby. "He likes beautiful things," they would say with gentle affection. "It makes him happy, and a happy emperor makes a peaceful kingdom." Inside the palace, the rhythm of life followed the emperor's routines. In the mornings, sunlight slipped into his dressing chambers, touching the fabrics that hung there like quiet rainbows. The emperor would walk among them, trailing a hand over sleeves and hems, feeling the textures and thinking about which colors matched his mood for the day. He enjoyed this small moment of choice, a moment he sometimes stretched longer than necessary, simply because it brought him joy. He took long, thoughtful walks through his wardrobe rooms. He paused before mirrors, not out of vanity, but out of a gentle appreciation for the artistry woven into each piece of clothing. His tailors often waited nearby, not speaking, simply watching the way the emperor admired their work. It made them proud, for they knew their ruler saw clothing not as something to show off, but as a way to celebrate creativity. Over time, the emperor's love for new outfits grew a little stronger. He never meant for it to happen. It was just that the more beauty he saw, the more beauty he wished to explore. Each new design sparked a desire to discover something even more unusual, more detailed, more marvelous. It was as though his imagination raced ahead of reality, searching for something no one else had ever worn. And so, he began asking his tailors to bring him new ideas more often, to experiment with colors they had never combined before, or to shape fabrics in patterns rarely attempted. The tailors did their best. They worked with silks, with linens, with soft wools, and with fine threads that shimmered in the light. They created coats embroidered with tiny golden leaves, robes patterned like gentle waves, and capes that seemed to hold a piece of sunrise in their folds. The emperor appreciated each one, wearing them proudly during ceremonies and celebrations. Yet each new piece, while delightful, made him dream of something even more extraordinary. As his desire for novelty grew, he began to imagine clothes unlike anything he had seen. Not simply beautiful, but wondrous in a way that felt magical. He never spoke this aloud, for it seemed like an impossible wish. But the thought lived quietly in his mind, glowing softly like a lantern set in a window at night. The palace noticed the shift long before the emperor did. Servants whispered kindly about how often he visited the wardrobe rooms. Tailors traded ideas late into the evening, trying to keep up with his growing curiosity. Even officials, who usually paid little attention to matters of clothing, began to hear of the emperor's deepening desire for something new. Though no one felt troubled, there was a small sense that the emperor longed for something just out of reach. Meanwhile, the kingdom outside continued as always. Farmers tended their fields, children played in the sunlit squares, and merchants arranged their goods in neat rows. Life was steady, but in quiet corners, small rumors began to drift through the air. Rumors of travelers, storytellers, craftsmen, and wanderers making their way toward the kingdom from distant lands. Some spoke of new inventions. Others carried tales of strange wonders they claimed to have seen elsewhere. And among these drifting whispers was one particular story, faint and uncertain, of a pair of weavers who created cloth unlike anything in the world. No one in the kingdom paid much attention at first. Travelers often exaggerated. Tales often grew taller as they crossed borders. But as the days passed, the rumor came again, carried by different voices, always describing the same thing. A cloth so unusual, so refined, and so remarkable that people struggled to believe it existed. Some said it shimmered with colors that changed with the light. Others said it revealed important truths. And still, others claimed it was made with techniques unknown to any other weavers. These stories eventually reached the palace. The emperor heard them during a quiet afternoon, while reviewing designs for a new ceremonial robe. At first, he simply smiled and returned to his work. After all, travelers often brought stories like these. But something about this one lingered. Perhaps it was the way the rumor kept returning. Perhaps it was the way people spoke of the cloth, not with excitement, but with uncertainty, as though unsure of what to believe. The emperor found himself thinking about it in the days that followed. A cloth so unique, a fabric so mysterious, a creation that might finally satisfy the strange yearning for something extraordinary. He wondered whether such a thing could truly exist. He wondered whether the weavers in the rumor were real. And quietly, he began to hope. Outside the palace walls, the roads leading into the kingdom remained busy with travelers, carts, and merchants. Among them, unnoticed and blending in with the rest, were two figures making their way closer each day. Two weavers who carried with them a promise that would soon capture the entire kingdom's imagination and draw the emperor into a story unlike any he had known before. Their arrival would mark the beginning of something unexpected, something delicate and strange, and the emperor's longing for novelty would gently open the door for what came next. The day the weavers arrived, the kingdom did not notice anything unusual at first. Travelers came and went often, bringing spices, songs, and stories from faraway lands. The roads were always lined with carts carrying baskets, bundles, and handmade goods. So when the two weavers quietly passed through the gates, blending in with the steady stream of visitors, no one paid them more attention than anyone else. They looked like ordinary craftsmen, tired from their journey and ready to offer their skills wherever they might be needed. But these two carried something more than tools and thread. They carried a story, one that had already begun whispering through the kingdom before they even stepped foot inside it. People had heard of them in small, passing ways. A phrase here, a rumor there, a wandering merchant claiming to have seen their work from a distance. Nobody knew for certain whether the tales were true, but that only made them more intriguing. And because stories grow like vines, stretching and twining into shapes that are sometimes difficult to recognize, the rumor had transformed into something strange and shimmering by the time the weavers arrived at the palace gates. It was said that these weavers created a fabric unlike anything in the world. Some said it changed with the light, catching colors nobody had names for. Others whispered that the cloth reflected a person's wisdom and character, showing itself only to those who understood its depth. Still others believed it held a hidden meaning, reserved only for the thoughtful and perceptive. No two versions of the rumor were exactly the same, but they all shared one idea. The cloth was extraordinary. The weavers asked for an audience with the emperor's officials. They carried themselves calmly, with the quiet confidence of people who believed deeply in their craft. When the officials invited them inside, they explained the remarkable nature of their cloth in gentle, assured voices. They did not brag, they did not boast, they simply described their fabric as something so refined and so rare that only those with true understanding would be able to see it fully. The claim was unusual, but it settled into the officials' minds like a puzzle waiting to be solved. They had never heard of cloth that behaved this way. They had never heard of material linked to inner qualities, like wisdom or discernment. And though they felt uncertain, the weavers spoke with such careful detail that the story felt somehow possible. Outside the palace, news spread quickly. The rumor, already alive and moving, picked up more speed. People gathered in corners of markets and along roadsides, sharing what little they knew. Some were excited, others doubtful, and a few simply curious, wondering whether the weavers had truly brought something magical, or whether they were just very skilled storytellers. The kingdom did not often receive mysterious visitors, and even the smallest hint of wonder stirred everyone's imagination. Inside the palace, the emperor heard the full story. He listened intently, his heart lifting with interest. This was not just any fabric. This was not a simple garment or a playful design. This was something rare, something perhaps unlike anything he had ever owned. The thought of a cloth that could reflect wisdom and character fascinated him. He imagined the colors, the shape, the way the fabric might flow when he walked. But more than that, he imagined the idea of wearing something truly unique, something that belonged only to him. Curiosity bloomed inside him like a small, bright spark. He tried to remain calm, but the excitement was difficult to quiet. It felt as though this cloth had appeared in answer to his quiet longing for something extraordinary, something that reached beyond ordinary beauty. He realized he wanted to see it for himself. He wanted to understand it. He wanted it to be real. Yet the emperor did not want to appear too eager. He asked his officials to visit the weavers first, to observe their progress and return with a detailed report. He trusted these officials, for they had served him faithfully through many seasons. They were thoughtful, careful people who rarely exaggerated. If the cloth was indeed as special as the rumor claimed, they would surely be able to confirm it. The officials agreed and visited the room the weavers had been given inside the palace, a room filled with empty frames, spools of thread, and tools laid neatly in rows. The weavers greeted them kindly and began to demonstrate their work. They moved their hands with practiced ease, guiding threads across the air between the empty frames, as though weaving invisible lines. Their faces remained serene, their voices calm as they explained the delicate process. The officials watched closely. They leaned in. They adjusted their eyes. But something strange happened. They saw nothing. No shimmer, no slightest hint of fabric, no threads passing from one side of the frame to the other. For a moment, confusion washed over them like a quiet wave. They wondered whether they were standing too far away. They wondered whether the cloth was simply too fine to see from their angle. They wondered whether their eyes were tired. But the longer they watched, the more they realized they could not see the cloth at all. This realization brought a soft worry. The weavers had described their fabric as something visible only to those who understood its meaning. And so, a silent question rose inside each official. Was the cloth invisible to them because they lacked understanding? Or was something else happening? No official wanted to admit uncertainty, not to the weavers, not to one another, and especially not to the emperor, whose admiration they valued deeply. So they nodded politely. They complimented the craftsmanship they could not actually see. They praised the fine textures, the gentle colors, the delicate patterns, describing what they imagined the cloth might look like. The weavers accepted their words with calm expressions, continuing their weaving motions as though everything was exactly as expected. When the officials returned to the emperor, they carried their uncertainty with them, tucked away behind careful smiles. They spoke warmly of the cloth, describing it with vivid detail. The emperor listened with widening interest, pleased by their enthusiastic words. Hearing them speak made the cloth feel even more real in his mind. If his trusted officials admired it so deeply, then it must truly be remarkable. Days passed, and the excitement continued to grow. The officials returned to the weaving room again and again, watching the invisible process and pretending to see every thread. They felt uneasy, but the feeling was gentle, not overwhelming. They simply did not want to be the only ones who failed to understand. And because each official hid their confusion, each believed the others saw the cloth clearly. Their silence created a quiet circle of agreement, delicate and unspoken. Word of their admiration drifted through the palace. Servants whispered about the beautiful fabric. Tailors wondered how such a cloth could exist. Even the guards standing outside the weaving room tried to imagine what wonders were being created inside. The emperor, hearing more and more praise, felt his anticipation growing steadily. He began to imagine himself wearing the finished garment, walking through the palace halls, the fabric flowing like an idea brought to life. Finally, after many days of waiting, he decided the time had come. He wished to see the cloth with his own eyes, not just through the descriptions of others. He rose early one morning, his heart filled with quiet excitement, and prepared for his visit to the weaving room. He imagined standing before the famous cloth, studying its details and discovering its mystery for himself. What he did not know was that the moment he stepped into that room would gently open the way to an even greater part of the story, one that would soon sweep through the kingdom like a soft but undeniable wind. The morning of the emperor's visit began with a soft glow, spreading slowly across the palace grounds. Sunlight brushed the tops of the tall towers, warmed the stone pathways, and slipped through windows where servants were already moving quietly about their tasks. There was a gentle feeling in the air, like the calm before a new season. Everyone knew that the emperor planned to visit the weaving room that day, and though no one spoke loudly about it, the anticipation seemed to float through the halls like a warm breeze. The emperor prepared himself carefully, though not with clothing this time. He chose something simple, not wanting to distract from the cloth he hoped to see. His mind was filled with questions and quiet excitement. He imagined what the fabric might look like. He wondered how it might feel beneath his fingers, how the colors might shift with the light, and how the patterns might reveal themselves in unexpected ways. He felt a mixture of eagerness and nervousness, a soft flutter beneath his ribs. When he arrived at the weaving room, the officials he trusted stood waiting, wearing expressions filled with polite pride. They bowed slightly as he entered, and he greeted them with gentle warmth. But beneath the surface of their smiles, each official secretly hoped the emperor would see the cloth clearly. They hoped that if he admired it openly, it would confirm that the fabric truly existed, and that their earlier descriptions had not wandered too far from what he expected. The weavers welcomed the emperor, with calm, respectful gestures. They guided him to the frames where the cloth was supposedly being woven, their hands moving gracefully through the air as though touching threads too fine to be seen. The emperor leaned forward, his eyes searching, adjusting, and straining to catch even the faintest hint of texture or color. But he saw nothing. The frames were empty, the threads were invisible, the cloth did not shimmer or glow. There was only open space, quiet and blank. For a moment, the emperor felt a gentle shock, not a loud, overwhelming one, but a small and surprising stillness in the middle of his thoughts. He blinked once, then again, wondering whether the angle affected his view. He stepped slightly to the side, leaned closer, and tried to focus carefully. Still nothing. A quiet warmth began to spread through him, not the warmth of excitement, but the warmth of uncertainty. He remembered the officials' glowing descriptions. He remembered the tales of the cloth's special nature. He remembered how each person who visited before him spoke with such admiration. And so, a thought drifted into his mind, delicate but undeniable. Maybe the cloth truly does reveal itself, only to those who understand its meaning. If that were true, then his struggle to see it must say something about him, something he did not want to face. He feared admitting aloud that he saw nothing. He feared disappointing those around him. He feared being the only one who lacked understanding. So, like the officials before him, he made a choice quietly within his heart. He smiled. He nodded slowly. He expressed gentle admiration for the work he could not see. He said nothing untrue, but he also did not reveal the truth he held privately. He allowed himself to believe that the cloth must be real, that others must see it clearly, and that the mystery was simply part of its charm. The officials, seeing his expression, felt immediate relief. They believed he saw the cloth perfectly. Their hearts lifted with pride and reassurance. The weavers, observing the room with calm, continued their motions as though the invisible threads grew more plentiful with each passing moment. They spoke softly about the progress they had made, how the cloth would soon be ready, and how the emperor would have an outfit worthy of the grandest celebration the kingdom had ever seen. Word of the emperor's admiration spread quickly through the palace. Servants passed the news from one corridor to the next. Maids whispered excitedly as they folded linens and arranged flowers. Guards murmured to one another during their shifts, wondering how special the cloth must be, if even the emperor found it remarkable. The palace seemed to grow brighter with each passing hour, filled with the energy of people who believed something wonderful was happening. Very soon, the talk of the cloth spilled out into the kingdom. People in the marketplace heard from traveling messengers that the emperor had seen the extraordinary fabric and found it breathtaking. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking what the magical cloth looked like. Merchants speculated about its colors, imagining hues they had never been able to create with their own dyes. The excitement grew day by day, gathering strength like a rising tide. The emperor, wanting to celebrate this exceptional creation, announced that when the outfit was finished, he would wear it during a grand parade through the kingdom. He wished for everyone to witness its beauty. The idea lit up the kingdom with joy. There had not been a parade in many months, and people loved the thought of gathering along the streets, sharing food, music, and cheerful company. Preparations began almost immediately. Workers hung streamers along the main roads. Children practiced the songs they would sing as the emperor passed. Bakers planned trays of warm pastries and sweet buns to offer neighbors and visitors. Tailors discussed what they themselves would wear to the event, wanting their own clothing to reflect the spirit of celebration. Even the animals seemed to sense the excitement, prancing around the fields and squares with more energy than usual. Despite all this cheerful activity, a gentle tension rested quietly beneath the excitement. It was not a heavy tension, nor a fearful one, but a soft and subtle feeling that settled into the spaces between people's conversations. No one knew quite what the cloth actually looked like. No one had seen it for themselves. They only heard what others said, and because each person believed the next, the belief spread effortlessly. The thought of questioning the cloth felt uncomfortable, as though it might disturb the happiness the kingdom was building together. Inside the palace, the pressure to admire the cloth grew stronger. Officials visited the weaving room again and again, praising the invisible progress with careful enthusiasm. They did not want to appear uncertain. Servants carried whispers of delight, even though none of them had seen the cloth either. The emperor, caught in the same quiet circle of expectation, felt the weight of wanting to meet everyone's hopes. He imagined the parade, the cheers, the pride of presenting something extraordinary to his kingdom. As the day of the parade approached, the weavers announced that the outfit would soon be ready. They spoke calmly, describing the final touches they needed to add, the finishing strokes that would prepare the outfit for its moment in the sunlight. Everyone in the palace grew even more eager. The emperor began to feel a fluttering mixture of thrill and nervousness, wondering how he would appear in the grand parade. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, the excitement had spread through every neighborhood. Families swept their doorsteps. Shopkeepers polished their signs. Decorations went up on windows and balconies. People talked about the parade as though it were a festival of wonder, something they would remember for the rest of their lives. No one yet suspected how important the parade would become, not only as a moment of joy, but as a turning point for the entire kingdom. For as the final preparations continued, and as the last threads of the invisible outfit were woven, the day everyone waited for grew closer and closer, carrying with it a truth that no one had yet dared to speak aloud. The morning of the grand parade arrived with a brilliance that seemed to settle gently over the entire kingdom. Sunlight spread across the cobblestone streets, glinting off rooftops, windows, and the tops of market stalls. Flags and banners fluttered in the soft breeze, and delicate floral arrangements had been set along the main streets, their sweet scent mingling with the aroma of fresh bread from the bakeries. Every corner of the town held a quiet energy, the kind of energy that makes people stand a little taller and look around a little more attentively, waiting for something important to happen. From the palace, the emperor emerged. His steps were measured, deliberate, and filled with a calm dignity. He moved through the halls with a quiet confidence, imagining the way his new outfit would be admired, the way the colors and patterns, though invisible to the eyes of others, would mark him as a person of taste and refinement. He had worn the so-called cloth carefully, with pride, and he carried himself as though each step was a brushstroke in a painting of perfection. The palace gates opened, and the streets outside were already lined with people. Families had arrived early, their children perched on shoulders, eyes wide with anticipation. Merchants had abandoned their stalls for the moment, and neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder along the roads, exchanging murmurs of excitement. A hush passed over the crowd as the emperor began his walk, an invisible thread of expectation connecting every observer. Musicians positioned along the parade route lifted their instruments, ready to fill the morning with soft, stirring music. The city was alive with the calm thrill of curiosity. As the emperor moved forward, the steps were echoed by the rhythmic beat of drums and the delicate swell of flutes and strings. The parade had a gentle, harmonious flow, not loud and boisterous, but serene and graceful. People clapped in polite bursts, cheering softly, voices carrying just enough sound to mingle with the music. But beneath the polite cheer, a peculiar feeling began to settle quietly among the crowd. Some onlookers glanced at one another, unsure how to respond. They had heard of the fabric's extraordinary nature, and yet, as the emperor passed, they could not see anything beyond his natural appearance. Their minds tried to adjust, to fill in the invisible threads and patterns described so enthusiastically by the weavers. They imagined textures, colors, and details, each person conjuring something slightly different, yet all trying to reconcile their own imagination with the idea of something truly remarkable. It was a delicate tension, gentle but unmistakable. No one wished to appear foolish. No one wanted to be the first to admit they could not see the extraordinary outfit. So they smiled, clapped, and whispered praises, all while their eyes searched and found nothing at all. It was a quiet trickle of uncertainty, spreading softly through the crowd. The more people admired, the more they wondered, the more they imagined. And in that shared imagining, something fragile and profound began to grow. A collective hope that the invisible could be made real by agreement alone. The emperor, feeling the attention of so many eyes upon him, walked with measured confidence. He lifted his head slightly higher, imagining how his new outfit would shimmer in the sunlight, how the fabric would appear to flow with the rhythm of his movement, how its details would catch the glance of every citizen along the streets. Inside, he felt a quiet warmth of pride, mingled with an unspoken curiosity about the murmurs and smiles around him. People were speaking, they were clapping, and yet he sensed their hesitations, subtle shifts in expression that suggested thoughts unsaid. And then, just as the gentle rhythm of the parade carried on, a small voice rose from the crowd. It was soft, simple, and unassuming, yet it carried through the calm air with the clarity of honesty. A child, perched on the shoulders of an adult, looked carefully at the emperor and asked aloud, in a tone of pure wonder, why the emperor seemed not to be dressed in the way others expected. The words were not meant to judge. They were not filled with mockery or sarcasm. They were innocent, truthful, and direct. Yet the effect was immediate. Those around the child paused in a subtle way, their expressions softening as they realized that the voice had spoken the truth they themselves had been too cautious to name. The simple observation spread like a quiet wave through the crowd, gentle but undeniable, reaching ears and hearts that had long been caught in the gentle tension of imagination and pretense. People began to feel relief. A small, soft acknowledgement passed through the streets. They could now see clearly in their minds that the emperor's outfit, while magnificent in description and intention, existed more as an idea than as something visible. A quiet shift in understanding unfolded, moving slowly but steadily, like sunlight breaking through mist. No one laughed harshly, no one spoke loudly. The recognition was gentle, calm, and full of human kindness. It was a moment of clarity carried not by judgment, but by honesty. The emperor, hearing the words, felt a soft pause in his own thoughts. He realized the child's voice had named what was already present in his mind, but unspoken. The cloth he had admired, the outfit he had imagined with such care, was not visible in the way he had expected. A stillness fell over him, not harsh or frightening, but reflective and profound. The music continued, the crowd remained in place, yet in that moment, the emperor's own mind opened to the understanding he had not yet faced. He saw in the eyes of those around him a gentle curiosity and recognition. They were not mocking him. They were noticing, quietly and sincerely, that the wonder he had pursued was an idea of beauty rather than a visible garment. And as he acknowledged the truth of the child's words, he felt a soft transformation within himself. Pride mingled with humility, and expectation softened into understanding. The crowd, sensing this shift, began to respond in kind. Applause returned, this time lighter, more genuine, less tethered to imagination, and more to presence. People smiled softly at one another, sharing a moment of simple, collective awareness. The child, still watching, remained a quiet point of clarity, a gentle reminder that honesty often comes from those unburdened by pretense. The parade continued along the streets, but the air had changed. Where before there had been an invisible tension, now there was a sense of calm clarity. The emperor moved forward, carrying himself with a thoughtful grace, understanding that true admiration was not found only in grandeur or novelty, but in the quiet recognition of what was real. The city itself seemed to exhale in unison, moving forward with soft energy, a kingdom holding a small but meaningful truth together. Even as the streets buzzed with soft excitement, people began to talk quietly among themselves about what had been revealed. The focus shifted from the imagined colors and patterns of the fabric to something subtler: honesty, clarity, and the courage to speak the truth. Conversations spread, delicate and slow, through households, markets, and corridors. The lesson, gentle and unspoken until that moment, now began to ripple softly across the kingdom. And though the parade continued and the music played, the emperor's thoughts lingered on that small voice. He realized that the child's simple observation had created a space for everyone to see clearly, for a kingdom to breathe gently, and for the next steps of understanding to unfold. It was not a moment of shame or judgment, but one of reflection, and it quietly prepared the way for a time when the palace, the citizens, and the emperor himself could learn to value sincerity, humility, and the subtle power of truth. The emperor's steps carried him forward, the city alive with soft music, soft cheers, and the quiet murmur of people seeing what was real. And as he walked, he knew that what came next, beyond the parade, beyond the applause, beyond the gentle recognition, would be a time of reflection and learning for everyone in the kingdom, including himself. The story, delicate and unfolding, had reached a moment of clarity, but the journey was not yet over. The streets of the kingdom glowed with a new light that day, one born of honesty and gentle understanding, carrying with it the promise that the lessons of the parade would ripple outward, shaping the thoughts and hearts of people in ways both subtle and enduring. After the parade, the streets of the kingdom gradually returned to their usual calm rhythm, though the memory of that morning lingered like a soft, warm light. People went back to their daily tasks, but their energy in their movements had subtly changed. The children played in the squares with laughter that seemed lighter, carrying a quiet awareness of honesty and the courage to speak simply. Merchants arranged their stalls with a newfound attention to clarity, sharing their goods without exaggeration, describing colors and shapes as they truly were. Conversations in homes, marketplaces, and along the roads held a gentle undercurrent of reflection, a soft recognition of the value of truth spoken kindly. The emperor returned to the palace with the same quiet dignity he had carried during the parade. But something within him had shifted. His steps were measured, careful, not from hesitation, but from thoughtfulness. He thought of the child's voice, so simple and unassuming, yet so profound. He reflected on how that single moment had altered the understanding of everyone who had been present, how it had softened the gentle tension that had traveled quietly through the crowd. In that small, honest question, the emperor saw the strength of simplicity, the weight of truth spoken without pretense. Inside the palace, the tailors and servants moved quietly, preparing rooms and arranging garments as they had always done. But even they carried a sense of gentle reflection. When they spoke of the parade, it was not with boastful pride or excitement over the emperor's new clothing. Instead, their voices held a softness, a careful attention to the meaning of what had occurred. They understood, in a delicate way, that the day had been more than a celebration of artistry. It had been a lesson in honesty, in perception, and in the humility that comes with both. The emperor spent time in his private chambers, seated among the fabrics he so loved, examining the patterns and textures with a quieter eye than before. He considered the pleasures of beauty and novelty, yes, but he also thought about the value of sincerity, of genuine understanding, and of listening without the cloud of expectation. He realized that his admiration for beautiful things had sometimes led him to ignore what was truly present, to chase appearances rather than clarity. And he understood, in a gentle and lasting way, that this moment of learning was more valuable than any outfit, any parade, or any applause. The officials, too, reflected quietly on their own part in the story. They remembered how they had nodded and praised the invisible cloth, concealing their uncertainty to maintain appearances. Yet now, in the gentle afterglow of the parade, they saw how the hesitation had been replaced by understanding. They could appreciate the lesson the event had brought without shame or discomfort. It was a tender acknowledgement that even small actions, like speaking truthfully or allowing uncertainty to be shared, could have a meaningful impact on the lives of many. Outside the palace, the citizens carried the lesson into the rhythm of everyday life. People found courage to speak with gentle honesty in ways they had not before. A baker described the texture of her bread without exaggeration. A craftsman explained the true qualities of his wares without attempting to impress. Neighbors conversed with one another more openly, aware that words could carry clarity as well as kindness. And children, inspired by the small voice that had started it all, learned that asking a simple, truthful question could be more powerful than long speeches or elaborate gestures. The kingdom as a whole seemed to breathe a little more freely after that day. The parade had been an event of delight, yes, but it had also been an invitation to reflection. People began to notice subtler details in their surroundings, to observe with care and to speak with thoughtfulness. They recognized that wisdom did not always arrive in grand or visible ways. It could come quietly, in moments of observation, in questions, in honest acknowledgement of what was present. And because the lesson had been gentle rather than harsh, it settled comfortably into the hearts of those who had witnessed it. The emperor, walking through his gardens in the soft light of evening, reflected further on his own growth. He considered the role of beauty in his life, the joy it had brought him, and the delight he had felt in colors, patterns, and fine fabrics. Yet he understood now that the truest form of appreciation was not simply to admire the surface, but to notice the substance of what was real. He thought of his people, of the trust they placed in him, and of the quiet responsibility that comes with leadership. And he knew that humility, combined with the careful attention of honesty, was a treasure greater than any garment, more enduring than any parade, and more meaningful than any decoration in the palace. Even the weavers, whose clever plan had sparked this reflection, continued their work quietly. They did not boast of their success, nor did they reveal any secret in the cloth itself. Their presence became a quiet reminder that sometimes a gentle lesson is far more valuable than an elaborate display. People remembered them not for magic or trickery, but for the way their craft had created space for clarity, understanding, and growth. And in the quiet of the palace and streets, the kingdom learned that wisdom could emerge in the softest of ways, through patience, observation, and a willingness to see clearly. As weeks passed, the memory of the parade remained vivid in the hearts of the citizens. Yet, it no longer carried the tension of uncertainty. It had transformed into a source of calm reflection and gentle joy. The emperor's enjoyment of clothing did not diminish, nor did his appreciation for beauty fade. But he approached it with a new understanding, with kindness, and with thoughtfulness. He valued not only the artistry of garments, but also the clarity of perception, the courage to speak, and the grace to listen. In homes, markets, and public squares, people carried forward the lesson with subtle, lasting effects. They learned that a kind observation could reveal truth, that honesty could coexist with respect, and that the simplest voice sometimes held the greatest wisdom. the kingdom grew more thoughtful, not through punishment or scolding, but through reflection and gentle understanding. And in this thoughtful state, life continued, peaceful, calm, and enriched by the quiet awareness that had spread through every street, every household, and every heart. The emperor, seated one evening by the window, watched the soft glow of sunset over the kingdom. He felt a quiet pride, not for any outfit or parade, but for the awareness he had gained, for the lesson that had touched both himself and his people. He realized that leadership required more than taste or admiration. It required careful listening, honest observation, and the courage to embrace truth with kindness. And he knew, in that quiet moment, that the kingdom itself had grown wiser and gentler, shaped by an event that had begun with imagination, but had been fulfilled by understanding. So life in the kingdom returned to its gentle rhythm, enriched by reflection and softened by honesty. The streets, the gardens, the markets, and the homes all held traces of what had been learned. People moved through their days with subtle attention to truth and care, aware of the lessons carried forward by a parade, a child's voice, and an emperor who had learned that the most enduring beauty is found not in display, but in sincerity. And thus, the story of the emperor and his extraordinary outfit found its place not as a tale of embarrassment, but as a quiet testament to the value of honesty, kindness, and gentle understanding. The kingdom thrived, the people flourished in thoughtfulness, and the emperor carried forward a new wisdom, one that would shape the lives of all around him, softly, steadily, and beautifully. The lesson settled into the hearts of everyone, and the kingdom, as a whole, became a place where truth could be spoken with care, heard with respect, and cherished for its quiet power. And in that way, the memory of the mysterious cloth, the parade, and the small, honest voice endured, not as a fleeting spectacle, but as a gentle guide to a life lived with clarity, thoughtfulness, and understanding.